Thank you so much for sorting that issue. Clients and
Yes. Fine. Have you seen the link I sent? Fine. Have you gotten the link? Okay. Oh, no problem. Yeah, no Allah. That's what I want to ask. One is presenting physically, one other person has confirmed to present virtually. So far now we have just two aside us. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. This is the last day of the conference and even the last session. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. It's better. Yeah, I took an analgesic, so I think back on some extent. Yeah. All right. All right. All right. Thank you. Let me, can I just tell him to send this slide? You can share for this. Okay. So there are spaces and yes, and the other person, Ijoku, yes, I've seen him this during lunch, so he's around. Also, that person not like. And that's what I'm not sure that last man. I'm not sure he's going to join because he's not picking his calls. I have not seen any slides.
Not 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Since someone is a link, someone is a link.
My therapist does not present on my behalf. Yeah.
I wanted to explain.
Yeah. You are still it is. You are still it.
Okay, this is I think it's really started.
I'll finish just as well.
Yeah. Yes, it's saying.
Yes, yeah, it's like. Wow.
Which is, and start.
Good evening. So welcome to our panel, Cannabis and the City, Drugs, Livelihoods, and Urban Hustle in Africa, part two of the panel. So we have four presenters, but one will not be presenting. Taiwo Akiemi from Allmark University will be presenting on cannabis, social constructionism, comparative health and hazard, and economic effects. While Brad Njoku from University of Lagos will be presenting on the Greenwood, cannabis, livelihoods, and its informal economy in Lagos. While I and Genos Klashnik will be presenting on cannabis and the urban also in southwestern Nigeria. So the first presenter, that's Taiwo Akiemi. Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. So you have 12 minutes to present your work on cannabis, social constructionism, comparative health and hazards, and economic effects. So the floor is open to you.
Please, how many minutes, please?
12.
B312. Okay. Right. Thank you. Let me share my slides. Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Taiwo Akinyemi. Please, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, my name is Taiwo Akinyemi from Hallmark University. I'm studying on the existing protocol. My topic is cannabis, social constructionism, comparative health and hazards, and economic effect. The outline to my presentation is I'm going to talk about the background of the study, the stem of the problem, research objectives, literature and theoretical framework, methodology and applicability of the ethical principles. Actually, this is a work in progress. To start with, what is cannabis? Cannabis is a yearly harvestable herbal plant that has different names, across different quarters. In some places, it is called Igbo. Some places called Janja and what have you. Historically, it is not new to human usage. It depends on the angle we look at it. And this explains why even in the country, Nigeria, there are institutions around it. And this is why we also have drug policies around it, because of the inevitability of it in human societies. The statement of problem. Globally, there's been waves of deviation away from the consensus, hitherto held on the subject matter of cannabis. The stance toward the prohibition of cannabis has been challenged, and of course, that's for many reasons, ranging from cultivations, consumptions, and what have you. Now, this study, therefore, is interested in focusing on the examination of cannabis popularity, its acceptance, pattern of its consumptions, its knowledge base, and stance toward the two polar ends between prohibitionist stance or legalizations among social actors as to which ways to go. Of course, where there are massive works already at the global stage on the subject matter of cannabis, which among other gives explanation for paradigm shifts in both its conceptualizations and patterns in its indulgence. It's, emergence in new laws being enacted, especially within global north nations of the world. Furthermore, the focus of this study is to complement and at the same time enhance and add more provocations to the ongoing debate on cannabis, concerning the place of and reality of its existence in the everyday life of Nigerians, and considers lower volume of existing literature on cannabis when compared with so much of research already into it and still ongoing in the global nations of the world. Cannabis study within the context of Nigerian lived experience remain elusive, particularly among the youth, which is referred to as Gen Z Republic. And this work intends to dive a little deeper, looking at one of the states in the country, which is Ondo State, which has history of massive, usage and huge markets around cannabis. Now the objectives. The research objective, like I earlier said, is still ongoing. The proposed responded are grouped into two. The first one, particularly, is the Gen Z Republic. The study intends to explore its acceptability among these Gen Z publics in modernity, including their knowledge base of it. The study is also looking now to see their consumption patterns. Is it for actual recreational or pharmaceutical based on prescriptions, or edible form or synthetics as the way they consume it? The study also want to look at form of socialization into its indulgence. Was it outright out of prescriptions or abuse, peer pressure, some other things? Now, furthermore, based on category P, which is professionals and religion leaders, which I'm going to dissect later on as what make up these professionals and religion leaders. The study also intends to find out their views on the ongoing debate on cannabis, including their personal consumption experience. To also examine their knowledge base, economic significance, risks, hazard, and health implication of its usage. And to also find out what they consider to be the best approach to this. Is it to make it remain prohibited within the context of Nigeria, or a paradigm have to be shifted to being legalized? And if the second one is the way to go, then how to go about it for adequate sustainability. So please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the significance of the study, the study is on the lookout, as this would help to develop a working policy framework for effective drug governance, drug administration, and real-time control through working paradigm shift of actions, which will likely metamorphose into safer and healthier society with human health and human continuity at the focal point of attention. So as for the literature review is still ongoing, and the rational choice story will be used to solidify this work. The focus of this story is on actors, social actors, who are considered to have hands and goals to which their actions are aimed. People engagement in cannabis was not just outrightly for lack of no purpose. They have reasons for its consumptions, depending on the way people look at it. So rational choice story is going to give a theoretical framework to solidify this work. Now, methodology now. The research will be conducted in Akure, Ondo State. The justification for the choice of Akure is because there are huge literature as regard around the usage, the cultivations, and the market for cannabis. And it also serves as a sort of, a representative of what could be found in the western, southwest of Nigeria and Nigeria as a whole also. Why the sort of population will be the Gen Z population, the people between the 90s to 20s. The justification for the choice of Gen Z population is because Nigeria, going by national policy review, Nigeria is considered to have a young population of people, and that's why the study is being targeted to these Gen Z populations. Then the second one is professionals and regional leaders. These people's opinion also need to be considered because they are stakeholders. They have daily engagement with youth who use it or do not use it, like law enforcement agency, particularly the NDLA, regional leaders, lawyers, pharmacists, and local herb sellers, because they also make use of it in their concoction and some other things. So I was saying that the research instrument, the study will make use of both primary use of primary style of data collections, which is both qualitative and quantitative. And then for category A, the Gen Z population, only quantitative approach to be employed. And the justification for the choice of quantitative for tendencies towards wider spectrum of audience of youth. The focus of the study for this category will be on objective 1, 2, and 3. And as for the category B, who happens to be the professionals and the religion leaders, only a qualitative approach should be employed, while the focus of the study for this study of the people will be on objective 4, 5, and 6, and through the instrumentality of IDI, which is in-depth interview. Data will be analyzed and through SPSS and through transcription if situation arise and content analyzed. I've discussed about the study locations. This is Akure, Nigeria. Then the ethical consideration principle is to consider confidentiality of data, beneficence to participants, moral sense of participants, even down to participant autonomy and informed consent. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Akinyemi, for your presentation. So the next presenter is Dr. Bright Njoku from University of Lagos.
Please. Cannabis. Cannabis, like this. The first one. Yeah.
The first file,
Yeah.
underground cannabis economy.
All right. Good evening, and welcome to this beautifully constituted panel. It's an honor to be among the giant scholars. Some of you I know personally, and the title of my work is the Green Book: Cannabis, Livelihood, and its Informal Economy in Lagos. Lagos was the federal capital of Nigeria, and even during the colonial period, it was the epicenter of commerce, colonial administration, and the instigation, the drive for self-independence by Nigerian nationals. So it has a lot of significance. And going to my work, Lagos is the epicenter of everything in Nigeria, be it religious, be it economy, even industrial. So in the area of cannabis, which of course came to Nigeria in the late 1940s, brought in by soldiers who returned from the Middle East. It has been extensively cultivated, and there is growing use, across the country, especially in Lagos because of the population. The cultivation is also very high, especially across Southwest, as we'll be seeing as we go on. Due to certain argument about its medical effects, it was banned in Nigeria, especially starting from 1966 anti-cannabis regulation. From that, even towards the period of a Buhari regime, those laws were reinforced. Then later, a specialized national institution was created in the mood of NDLEA. Please go back to the last. In the mood of NDLEA to enforce the national law. And despite this prohibition, you could see the discrepancies between the legal prohibition and the availability of this drug. Despite this prohibition, is something that could be found everywhere if you know the right places to go to. So the argument now is, why do we still have this thing ban and prohibition when you can actually get them everywhere? And courtesy of this ban, the states, the government is losing tax revenue. We are not deriving anything from the extensive use of these things, which many of us here know. States is not deriving anything, but here these things are widely available. Wouldn't it be in the best interest of everyone if this things it's legalized and people are allowed to have control access to this? So this brings in the economic aspect. Wouldn't state benefit more if these things are made available? Especially as it is being done in other parts of, even the continent and other parts of the world where we have controlled access to. Very good. Yeah, Nigeria, by record, UN Office of Drug, Nigeria is perhaps the largest markets for cannabis sativa. This is a combination of decades of cultivation, use, and the illicit trafficking. There is estimated over 10 million users of cannabis in Nigeria, and by the fact that Lagos is, has the biggest population in Nigeria, many of them in Lagos. In Lagos, this study is based on ethnographic research, personal experience across some of the most dangerous places in Lagos, shanty places, across the dungeon of drug campaigns that are in motion in Etiosa, Ikorodu, across many parts of Lagos. And these persons are illicit actors, underground illicit actors, and they provided genuine, original information about the trade. Averagely, a kilogram of this thing sell 5,000 naira, and for the little size that you need to smoke, either 100 or 200 naira. Please go. Geographically, I've described Lagos. Yeah, there are drivers. There are people who drive the demand for cannabis in Lagos. Those are majorly transport operators, the drivers, the conductors. Then you also have the area boy culture. Hardly will you see any area boy that doesn't take. I'm not saying every area boy takes, but hardly. I'm saying this because I live among them, right? Hardly do you see area boy that doesn't take. Then there is a growing use of cannabis in food production in Lagos. You might not know this, but snacks and record from NDLEA, because I also interviewed, record from them show that there have been arrests of people who make snacks and all that. So there is a growing use of these things in making our food. So the food industry also contributes to the demand. Then we have the entertainment industry. I interviewed several upcoming artists, some established artists, and some of them confided that they cannot perform, they can't go on stage without taking, especially cannabis. Then literature, there are extensive, to some extent, materials on cannabis in Nigeria and narcotic in general. However, many of those materials focus on the medical aspect and the implication, the legal criminalization, and the history. So you have this gap in literature, this huge gap in literature that hasn't really looked at the economic aspect. Taking a cue from societies such as South Africa, where there is a thriving cannabis market, control use, creating opportunities for farmers, government through taxation, and the society in general. So this is where this work want to fill that gap in literature. Yeah, traffickers, since this thing is banned, traffickers adopt different methods to move these things around. It includes concealing them inside different vehicle compartments, including creating additional fuel tank where they conceal this and as they move them from Ondo State to Ogun State, those states down to, and so many other states in the Southwest, especially and South, down to Lagos. Sometimes they put them inside gari and other food, food packages. And there's also that on the organized crime network, perhaps some by law enforcement agents, some by other people who help to move this. NDLEA, some officers mentioned to me that they've arrested police patrol van helping move this. They've arrested ambulances helping to move this. So many organized syndicates are involved in the movement of this. Back. Okay. Warehousing. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that Ikorodu, Ajah, Mushin, Badagry, and many parts of Lagos have huge warehouses where these things are stored, and from there they are distributed across to the people who help market them. Okay, yeah, the underground distribution network. You have bulk suppliers, middlemen, street level vendors. They use area boys a lot. And some of us will be surprised. They also use your gatemen. Those are bookie that are your gatemen. They use them and they actually sell the little size to the end users. Yeah, managing criminalization. To avoid being detected, they use so many systems. For instance, developing a surveillance network underground, coded. You see somebody who dresses as a bricklayer, carry bricklayer tools, but inside the bag he's carrying, there are wraps of these things just to evade detection. You have avoiding known hotspot, or operating discreetly, building trust and information. They build trust in such a way that people who do this and hardly disclose information. That's some of the problem I faced while gathering material. They hardly disclose information. I had the privilege of knowing kingpins myself. I've worked on area boys and I know many of them. They took me into these lungos and acted as cover. So they also offer bribes, law enforcement agents. And in some situations, you will see police taking these things with them and they form, but they also offer bribes, yes, shift location when there is too much pressure. The next slide, please. Yes, like I said earlier, the research method adopted is historical and ethnographic. Oral interview derived from extensive fieldwork from the people who use this and who sell underground network, who provide these things for sale, and then we also use newspaper report. Interviews include peddlers, baron, cannabis user, security agent. Next slide. Findings. Over 80% of my informants attest to the fact that cannabis trade generates enormous wealth for patrons and barons in Lagos. Decriminalization and legalization of cannabis will generate huge tax revenue for the state and by extension, the federal government. Next one. Yeah, challenges. Reluctance to give interview. Many were so scared to give interviews. Threat to personal safety, especially the fact that I live almost around the hotspot where even NDLEA, the state, the national agency for that combat this thing, they are usually scared to go into these places, even when they are with guns and all that. So it was a big threat to my personal safety. And the request for patronage, before you interview or talk to them, they want you to do what they do. They want you to buy, they want you to use. I've taken a few puff, but those are some of the threats that comes with doing the job. Oh, go on. Yeah, conclusion, in spite of the criminalization of this substance, it is generally available if you know the right places to go to. cannabis economy in Lagos is complex, resilient, and multifaceted informal sector. This work highlights the limit of prohibition in context of widespread economic precarity. Recommendation: government should consider decriminalizing and legalizing cannabis. This will provide huge tax revenue for government, the state government, and the federal government. If government can earn tax revenue from cigarettes, for instance, of course, I'm not equating the effect of both. Why not cannabis? Especially where researches have shown that some other economies are already opening up these things for investors, control usage, and everybody will be happy for it. I'm not ignorant of the medical effects, but it will be, especially in an era where, as a developing economy, we have problem with revenue generation. This will help to shore up revenue, both the federal, states. The revenue that ordinarily are going to the payroll and underground network will not be accessible to government because they are capitalizing on the criminality of this product to cash in on huge revenue. Probably when you make this thing available, it will not be as expensive as it is, right? Thank you for listening.
I call it drug lord. Thank you for your presentation. So the next presenter is Jonas Plashnik. Some of us will be presenting.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. I'm just setting up the presentation. Just 1 second. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you just say if you can see my presentation?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for inviting me to talk. I'm actually sort of replacing my colleague Ediomo Ubong Nelson, who is not able to join us today. And Janet Ogundaro will also contribute. So I'll keep this short. It's really nice to be part of this panel, or these two panels, really. I listened, or was part of it yesterday as well. And there were a lot of really interesting new insights into the world of cannabis and the city in Nigeria. So what I want to do very briefly is talk about our research a little bit. A lot of it actually sort of resonates with what the two other presenters have said today and the two presenters yesterday. So I'll try not to overlap and repeat too much. But I will first talk about the project that this research was part of, talk a little bit about what we did in Nigeria and some preliminary findings that I'm able to talk about, and then hand over to Janet to add anything that I might have missed. And this project was a collaborative project, as you can see, and among three institutions: CRISA, the University of Ibadan, and Bristol, and was funded by the UK Economic and Social Research Council, which is the sort of major independent funding body in the UK, and that ran from 2020 to 2024. So officially, it's actually already finished, but we are kind of disseminating findings from our research. And the project was called Cannabis Africana, Drugs and Development in Africa. And just very briefly about the project, which was run between the University of Cape Town, I should say, and the University of Bristol, with many partners in several countries across the continent. The key question that we tried to address, if I had to sort of look at one specific one, is what the historical and contemporary role or place of cannabis is in African rural and urban lives. And what we wanted to do really is to sort of shift the focus to some degree, and I think that works quite well with some of the other papers on these panels as well. We wanted to shift from this kind of concern with what's happening at the moment with cannabis to looking at it from a more historical perspective, not only in Nigeria, but in other countries as well, because we felt that looking at it from a historical perspective helps to sort of ground it or embed it better into its context, because often drugs or substances like cannabis are considered as a very contemporary problem, a presentist problem, and people forget that it has a long history and that you need to understand that history to address them as a policy issue, but also as a social or economic issue that you want to study. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to shift focus from just looking at cannabis as a criminal justice issue. You know, this is considered a drug, whatever that means. Many of our interviewees would not consider cannabis a drug, but a medicine or something else. But we wanted to shift this focus from looking at it as a drug or as a criminal justice issue to looking at it as a livelihoods issue. So what role does it play in people's lives, in rural lives, for farmers, for transporters, but also in urban livelihoods, for people selling it, for people using it, and so on. And we used a qualitative approach. You know, this is mostly based on interviews, and especially with people involved with cannabis that have a lived experience of cannabis. That's market insiders, but also state actors. And some of them have been mentioned. And in addition to these kind of interviews we did ethnography in some specific sites, which I'll mention in a second. One other thing to mention is that, you know, when we started this project, it didn't really have this aim to look at policy too much, but it started in 2020, but we designed it a long time ago, I think in the mid 2010s, where there was no country in Africa that had sort of started to liberalize its policy on cannabis. But these things changed, and so our research became relevant to policy actors across the continent that were interested in reforming or changing policies. And some of those partners you can see here at the bottom of the slide, some of them working in Nigeria. One thing I should also mention is that IFRA, you know, and CRISA are two research institutions, but that have helped us to really focus that research in Nigeria. So it's important to mention them, I think. I don't know if you can see that. So these are the project sites really for the whole project. Looked at 4 countries. One of them is Nigeria, but we also looked at Kenya, looked at Zimbabwe and South Africa. And interestingly, when we designed the project, we didn't know that, but by the time we ran the project, 2 of those countries had started to liberalize their policies. Zimbabwe had started to allow for the legal cultivation for industrial purposes of cannabis. So that's producing hemp for fiber and things like that, as well as for the cultivation for medicinal purposes, again in Zimbabwe. And South Africa did the same thing around the same time in 2018 for industrial and medicinal purposes. And they, in South Africa, also decriminalized the private use and private production or growing of cannabis. So you see, when we started our research, the whole map of the continent was actually red. Sort of countries were adhering to a prohibitionist approach, like in Nigeria and like in Kenya. But by the end of our project, countries like Ghana, Morocco, and South Africa and Zimbabwe had sort of changed approach. But one thing I think to mention is that, you know, these colors on maps, as maps in general anyway, they can be quite deceiving in a way, because while, you know, Nigeria might be red, Kenya might be red, and the law might be very harsh and draconian and pro-prohibition, there was a process of change in these countries in terms of the debate about cannabis. So in Kenya, for example, you had one presidential candidate, in Nigeria as well, actually, that ran where cannabis legalization was one of the sort of major issues they were promoting. And even in countries that did liberalize policy, like South Africa and Zimbabwe, we argue that a very prohibitionist approach still sort of dominates those policy debates there as well. So it's not, you know, that these laws are representing everything that's happening within these countries. Anyway, that's kind of to give you an overview of the project. Our major aim really of the project was, as I said before, to center the perspective of often very marginalized and stigmatized actors, the people that are criminalized currently in Nigeria, to sort of foreground their views and in a way also help disrupt dominant narratives about cannabis, and especially state views that have criminalized cannabis, but also some views that have sort of seen cannabis as sort of this commercial opportunity that you would see dominating in sort of commercial circles, for example. Anyway, the methods, very briefly, we intentionally didn't want to do this as a quant study or quantitative study, partly because the UN and UNODC specifically had done related work or had tried to do some of it. So, you had this drug use survey, for example, run in 2018. Our colleague Ediomo is actually now involved in rerunning a new version of that, sort of an update. And we knew that we wanted to go beyond that because we felt that the field really missed the kind of insider perspectives on what's happening in these markets for cannabis. So that's what we did. We in 2022 and 23, we ran a multi-sited field work in two key urban areas. I think the urban areas I can mention, it's Lagos and Ibadan, and also in three rural settings in the southwest and south of Nigeria. This brought us to about 60 interviews with key policy actors. So that's drug policy officials, law enforcement actors, as well as policy activists. There's quite a few of them in Nigeria that are very active in this field. And more importantly, I think probably 2/3 of our data are market insiders. So that's mostly cannabis farmers and transporters and some traders, or what they themselves call themselves as dealers in urban areas, also some wholesalers and users. And we did related ethnography as well. The key thing, I think what was mentioned before already in the last two presentations, I think is cannabis use, trade and cultivation, while it's so widespread in the country, I think it's 10% of the adult population has used cannabis over the last 12 months, for example, according to the UNODC. It remains highly criminalized and stigmatized, which means gaining access, as we heard in the previous presentation, is very difficult, and it depends on the trust that you can build with people. So in our case, because we had worked for quite a long time, in my case since 2005 actually, in illegal drug markets, especially in the Southwest, that sort of we use those kind of connections, also the connections that Janet had within the healthcare field, where people already had trust in those kind of healthcare providers that we use then to enter or to work with cannabis market insiders in certain rural areas. Yes, I'm running out of time, so I'll keep it very briefly to these some preliminary findings, and I'm happy to talk more about some of those later on. So what we found in the research, very briefly and very broad brush, is that there's very diverse narratives of cannabis available in Nigeria. So you have on the one hand a very dominant one that depicts it as a very dangerous drug that leads to mental health, leads to health and security problems in the country. That has been established, as we heard, since the 1930s during the colonial period through colonial laws, but reinforced since the 1960s when the early post-colonial military regime sort of pushed on that kind of stuff. But it still gets, if you open any Nigerian newspaper, you will find some sort of press release type of article, or press release-based article that was produced very likely by the NDLEA, which shows how many people have been arrested and how dangerous these drugs. And we saw that in our data as well, people talking about that. And it's socially quite accepted, that view that cannabis is probably as dangerous as some other drugs. Anyway, but we also found quite contesting and quite polarized views, on the other hand, especially among market actors, who depicted it as a new cash crop, this green gold that we heard of before, for example, which exists also among policymakers, among certain governors even, who talked like this, but also among our market insiders, which were much smaller scale producers and things, and less politically powerful, obviously. Some people used it as a medicine, talked about it as a medicine, but also there were other meanings, the spiritual meaning that, and it being a sort of almost a symbol of freedom for some people in some ways. But what we found in general is that these narratives, they could be very diverse, but there was much more nuance among market insiders, and including about legal markets, which they were not seeing as the sort of the solution for everything there was. So when we asked our market insiders, farmers, dealers, whatever, about would you want cannabis to be legalized, some of them said yes, and some of them said no, because they realized that maybe there were some health dangers of cannabis, but more likely they were worried that if it were to be legalized, it might not be to their benefit, but it might be the economic actors that already dominate the cocoa trade, for example, might now also dominate the cannabis trade. So they were quite nuanced in their understanding. Without being policy experts, they already knew a lot of stuff. And I think in part that was driven because they had the lived experience of cannabis and the lived experience of other crops like cocoa cultivation. They knew about it. They knew if you don't be careful, most of the incomes will be going to some rich urban investors and things like that. Anyway, so quite diverse narratives on cannabis. What is the one important thing that I should mention is the cannabis livelihoods. So contrary to claims about organized crime, cannabis is primarily a livelihood strategy for most people, or for most people that we spoke to, and for some people basically in rural and urban communities, within a context of severe hardship, within a context of poverty and declining incomes from legal sources. So illegal cannabis offered for many of them a pathway for upward social mobility. You could see that sort of reflected in the names for cannabis. In Yoruba, it's Ewe Ola, or in Igbo, we came across the leaf that lifts the poor, for example, which sort of shows that what kind of role cannabis plays in terms of for those people. It helps certain people that really experience decline in the traditional incomes, be it cocoa production, be it some kind of trade they're involved in, an alternative basically to really maintain a much more stable income. But there were also people that were less marginalized. We can't just say that this is only people on the margins. We had people that were graduates from top universities, probably some of them, those universities, represented at the LSA as well, that were just looking for a more stable income, that decided, no, I'm not going to run my cocoa farm because it just doesn't pay at the moment. I rather plant cannabis or I sell cannabis in an urban context because it pays much better and it's much more stable. And I think one thing that is very interesting also in relation to the last presentation, that's my last real point, is that cannabis was also a livelihood for the state, for law enforcers. Not only did it help to justify the work of the NDLEA, because they could put these sort of messages in the news, on the media, but it also helped law enforcers on the ground because they often gained material sort of benefit from illegal cannabis, because they received bribes, sometimes on a very, very regular basis, almost like tax payments from urban dealers, for example, who were sort of, everyone knew there was a bank or something like that in an area, and they would just have to pay off local law enforcers or the NDLEA, and they would receive make a livelihood from that as well. So it's not just people on the margins, and it's not just the people that are criminalized that make a living from that, but law enforcement as well, essentially. The final policy conclusion that I want to end with is for policy and reform really to be effective, this kind of livelihoods dimension of cannabis really needs to be acknowledged. At the moment, this is all about organized crime and some criminals making loads of money, which they don't really do. If anyone has the connections, the social and cultural capital, they will not farm cannabis. They will do alternatives. They will gain money through the oil economy and things like that. But these kind of livelihoods for people on the margins really needs to be acknowledged for reforms to work, and not just end up adding sort of or promoting the interests of the powerful that already benefit anyway. That's it. I'll leave it at this. If Janet wants to add something here or later in the discussion, it might be a good time. Anyway, but thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And these are some sources. Sorry. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Gernot, for your presentation. So we open the floor for questions, comments. Anybody with questions? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to refer to the first presenter who right, that's thanks for the presentation. That's a good work. I just want to make observations to make the work better, especially on the issue of methodology. Yeah, the methodology still need more refining in terms of the population. You said that you use Gen Z, and actually you define what Gen Z is, those that are born between a particular period and this, and you discover that those are the people that you find in secondary school, mostly, and some university students. Are they in a confined circle of population? Are they the out of school Gen Z, or those who are in organized education sector? So you need to specify that so that we know where you get your population from. That's very important. And also on validation of your test, institutional research instruments. How do you want to validate it? You said that you are using interview. What are the things that constitute your interview? How was they adopted or adapted into the research instruments? That needs to be clarified. So that's mine for the first presenter. Should I ask the second?
Yeah.
So for the second presenter, thanks for the beautiful presentation in person of Dr. Bright. That's a good one. I just want you to be more specific, because when you say there are some financial gains, if government wants to go into it, they need to know what they are gaining and what they are losing. If you say that we should now legalize the selling of cannabis, and at the end of probably 5 years or 20 years, we're having a lot of people who have to resign to our and still spend the country money to make them better. What are the justifications? So we need to leverage it. Then on the research ethics, in the community of scientists, they do not believe that you should use yourself as a test subject. If there is no way you can prove it, and it doesn't go with research ethics. So as much as you want to convince us that you actually go to field to do some things, that should not appear in literature that for you being a subject of being used. So for now, I want to rest my case on that. And on the presentation made by, I can't get the name, last presenter. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I thought I would also see some data, because most of the presentation has been on the security agents, working with them, but we don't have concrete data on the exact number or categories of people who are involved in consumption of cannabis. And I also want to ask all the presenters, because it has always been that if you want to commit crime, you take drugs or cannabis. And for some of us that grown up in Islam, we know that when they want to cause chaos, just give them cannabis and ask them to go out. But I'm surprised that the connection between drug intake and violence, how do you want to connect it, being an expert in this area? Thank you.
Your question? Yeah. Can you please use for so that
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I want to direct questions to all the presenters. Number one, I did not question per se. I think beyond looking at the advantage of this cannabis, we should also consider the cultural implications of this. If we consider how cultural and historical context impact the way cannabis is being perceived and constructed in our environment, I think we need to look at the cultural aspect of it so that it can as well guide our policy recommendation. Number two, I think for us to have a better research, we can also do a kind of a comparative analysis in such a way that if you are telling us that okay, it's better Nigerian legalize the use of the cannabis, if we can also get case studies probably from other countries that have legalized it, what they have benefited from it, I think it will be better for us. Lastly, I think we should also try to look at the risk associated with this cannabis, and if you can consider the risk and try to tell us how this risk, because if looking at the situation currently, cannabis has not been legalized, people are still, they are still doing it on the ground. If we look at the risk associated to it, you know that it's not something that the government can easily control. If we consider the risk associated with it and how the risk can be managed, probably after the legalization, it will also be better for us. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. Good evening. My name is Matona. I say my first introduction goes to the second presenter. I want to appreciate all the presenters for this further topic. It's not something that is being discussed about academic conversation. And this has in a way shows that bringing it to Nigerian context, the attention is paid to it. Even what the second presenter takes us this it shows that people will still have this drugs being smuggled around in our communities. And I want to ask as a form of a question to me, because this methodology told us that conducted something. So I want to believe that you will have some. Did you do thematic? Because I believe it's your method is probably quantitative, I'm assuming, and it was purely qualitative. And it will be better for us to see from your findings how the nexus of conversation, because you have different category of persons. You stated to us that you have from the policy maker, the security agent, you have from people those in the community that smuggles it, and you were concluding to us that it has benefits to the country. So the conversation within this space of stakeholders that are involved in the use should be, from my own perspective, involved. Is it the users? Are they the ones? Because I saw in the second, the third presenter, he told us those who feel that if it is legalized from the dance from their conversation. So I expect also that from your own conversation, there should be who are the group that are seeking, not you directly, coming, say that it has benefits. Maybe from the group who uses it, they want to aspire that it will benefit for the country. So I want to see that personally, I would have loved to see that in your engagement with us. They're telling us about me legalizing it and decriminalizing it. Of course, Nigeria, there are some things that, well, what do you mean by decriminalizing? Is it from the perspective of the users or the perspective of the security agents? There are two perspectives and there are two directions ongoing between that conversation. And it needs to be clear. And I also concluding asked that in your recommendation also, you said government should decriminalize it. And when we talk about government in this type of interaction, there are a lot of persons that are constituted with the government. Are we saying the federal government? Are we saying the state government? So when we are making conclusion as my own recommendation, I felt as a second that our recommendation should specify clearly who is to do what and how it should be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the question. Can you please come forward so that the speaker will?
Okay, thank you. My name is Royal Ade of the Department of History. Let's talk big. Excuse me. So, I thank the presenters, those powerful presentations. However, I have no key. It's like this one, it's already picked into my notes. It's already done. Just not making it to be trivial. I shall start from the title, where you say green code. So I just want to ask, is cannabis green? I've never seen it before. I only see it when it's on fire. So, is it green?
Yes.
So, it's green.
It's green.
Okay, at the plant stage,
yes,
not at the use stage, not as at the time they are selling. So, okay. Then, I also want to make a little comment about your advocacy for criminalization of cannabis, which I feel you are free anyway to make an advocacy or to make a case for the criminalization. You can submit. However, do you take cognizance or do you take into consideration the effects of cannabis on the overall economy? Since you talked about informal economy, so do you take cognizance of the overall trend? Then you also make use of a certain data that says about 10 million people are involved in use of cannabis in Nigeria. Then you go further to say that they do it in secret, and so I just want to question the statistics. So how do you come across the statistics? These things are not in the book. How do you use the statistics? Lastly, the cannabis, informal economy in which you place cannabis, I want to look at it from another perspective, especially how to categorize it. Is it an elite crime, or crime of the powerful, or the crime of the supporters? So those are my questions for you. So you need that categorization. Thank you very much.
Taiwo, can you, since you're online, and first speaker, can you please talk to the questions and comments?
All right, thank you for your comments. Please, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thanks so much for the comments. The first one talk about I should make a specific clarification as regards the conceptualization of the Gen Z. Yes, I'm going to look into that. I'm going to use that to guide my methodology. Thank you for that observation. Then as regards the second one, when he said, what do I mean by interview? What I mean by interview is a qualitative approach through IDI, in-depth interview, by way of coming up with interview guides and engage my participants one-on-one. That's what I mean by an interview. So that is that. I don't know if I've been able to attend to that valuable concern.
So, right.
Okay. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah.
The first person asks about the specific benefits to government decriminalization. Legalizing and decriminalizing cannabis creates value chain across both user, government will benefit in terms of tax revenue, farmers will benefit, just everybody involved. And you having security agents chase you all around because you are into a certain business will no longer exist. So it will provide, or perhaps other industry will spring up. Taking an example from elsewhere, there is a pilot study that has been done in South Africa, like the last call, presenter mentioned, that established that cannabis is a huge industry. Perhaps that can even rival crude oil if we do it well. So that in South Africa case, it creates opportunity for the farmers because NDLEA is no longer chasing them. For instance, now government gives them land, they give them a place where they farm, and they cultivate this in large scale, from which they make huge sums of money. And government has also taken it further. For instance, in South Africa, of course, we know they have drug problems in general, but they've taken it further to make cannabis available for people for health use and controlled using. The extent of the success, I don't know, but it's a policy that we can also adopt. And when we talk about the connection between availability and the mental health issue, it's in fact in 1960, early 1960s, one of our famous professor of health, whose name I can't remember now, did a study about the relation between cannabis, Ibu, and the mental ill patient in Southwest Hospital. You see that it was very, I can't remember the name, Professor something, I can't remember the name now. But yes, that study was in 1964, 65.
I remember his name.
Yes, so yeah, it's of course established that. Okay, you should know that. Of course, it's established that there is a correlation between its availability, its use, and mental health issue. But society has gone beyond that. We've seen communities in the US, for instance, Canada, Mexico, parts of Morocco, making this thing available to people to use in a controlled basis. And it's generating employment, generating tax revenue, generating further revenue for the farmers and across the value chain. And I also have a question about the cultural implication. I mean, society is not static. Things change. There are things we use now that our forefathers did not use, right? And the benefits are enormous. And it's even proven that this thing is medicinal if you use the right context. And somebody asked that I inserted myself into the research. I of course, in a ethnographic study, you have to be among these people. Yeah. You need to do as they do. Otherwise, the trust will not be there, right? I've never taken alcohol in my life. I've never smoked. But, if you go for this and to make these guys trust me and give me information, I don't think it's wrong. And
for academic purposes, you can remove that from your study or from your discussion.
Okay.
It depends on how it's constructed its methodology. If in your methodology you told us that you are doing a participant observation,
no participants.
Not participants. He is manipulating
But what is it now?
Participating in their activity. So you will say, because even when you say you are participating in their activity, you also have to tell us by documenting the activity, the outcome of what you participated in. So what was the result? Not just like looking the show. What was the result? The game product because you participated in the activity, not just to convince them. You also have an outcome that you want to get in the process of. It's not like you're putting yourself in there to be able to experience what they are experiencing. So it was the latter part of it, of the outcome.
Thank you. It's clear now. Thank you. That's the benefit of presenting to a wider audience like this, especially bigger professors like you. And there's a question about who should decriminalize cannabis. Of course, federal. Federal government who established the NDA. Of course, states, in our democracy, it does not have power to mix, those sort of. It's the federal government who should. And we are not like in the US where component states can take those actions. And they also have question about the data of 10.6 million. It's not actually my data, like the UN drug agency, the data, the research they did in 2018, released in 2022. So it's an established data. And they're talking about if they do it in secret, or if you follow me now to Ulegba and Motion, you see people who smoke this thing on the street. So people don't do it secretly anymore. You even see law enforcement agents who are smoking with them as we speak on the street. So it is not hidden. All right. And I can't remember any other question. Yeah.
You have a question? All right.
Good afternoon. Listen to your actually you're presenting very happy to this is the first time hearing the opposites of what we have been taught in the master's cannabis. My question is this: when you talk about the commercialization of this cannabis, there are two things that come to your mind. We have a sector of economy where we generate revenue, like what you have said, and another comes from China. Then the other side, the health. Now, my question is clear. When you push that, what are talking about the revenue management to the government? At the same time, trying to put it out of the regulatory constitution. I would generate revenue from this cannabis by usually madness in society. That's the first question. And the second one is this one is very, very practical because I think I will theology now theory should be very, very practical when we're doing an investigation. When you are comparing Nigeria to European countries, sorry to say, we are Nigeria. This is a disordered country. This is a disorganized country. This is a country whereby lawmakers and lawmakers. So in a situation where we are comparing Nigeria to a country where the administration is solid like a rock, you stand up, you went down your you say even our lawmakers smuggling this drug, ambulances, policemen. Please, where is the policy to ensure that when this cannabis is legalized, commercialized, it becomes legalized in the community? Lawmakers will not be lawmakers anymore. And instead of we to have a sane society, it becomes standard beauty and a sane society. That's
whether this is elite or also others or which one inspires report.
Yes, straight away. Like my sister said, it's cut across. It's breach. I live in a place where I see people do this. In my investigation, I went to places I saw. We're on record. I wouldn't mention, but it's involved people who have high standing, who take this place and who participate as bailiffs. When police raid, they arrest these small guys. They are not the main people, right? I'm sure you remember it's on the news. I can talk about this. A wife of a police DIG or thereabout was arrested in Lagos a few months ago. It's on the news, right? Having share of this, they have big warehouse where she kept this, and she supplied the whole axis of that area. So
it's informal. It's not formalized.
It's not formalized. It's not formal. You can. It's not like Gary that you can go to. You understand? So it's underground. It's not on the shelf. right? So it's informed. And reacting to your question, sir, the answer is control usage, control and medical use, right? We acknowledge that we have the problem of law enforcement and all that, but in other places where this thing have been done, it's control and medical use. It's not available to everybody, right? But if proven that you need these things, there are over-the-counter drugs that if you abuse it, of course it will run you mad. But people, perhaps you don't smoke, but cigarettes are available. Do you understand? So it is issue of control usage and enforcement. I appreciate the fact that we need to work on our policy implementation, enforcement, especially our law enforcement agencies. It's very crazy and they easily compromised. But we're growing the short, and it will take the dedication of me and you and everybody. We are also the state, and the state is everybody. So we have roles to play.
I'll talk about the criminalization. If the fact remains that even though it's illegal, the growth, the cultivation and use of cannabis keeps growing every year. The way it grows, if you look at data over time, the data trends over time, I actually did not. The growth, the cultivation, and the use of cannabis, it's crazy. So, and let me just be informal, like, you can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So why not try and see whether it's going to be legalized and if it's controlled. And the problem, the use of cannabis is not only for use, like the recreational use. We have aesthetics use, medicinal use, and it's been useful for people in the pharmaceutical industry for addressing lots of ailments. So, and the kind of cannabis that will be grown, we have types of cannabis sativa that will be grown for medicinal purposes, so it's beyond the one we see on the streets. So if we can, there will be policies that will be put in place, and let's see how it's going to work out. I have a comment for, don't worry, we'll get back to this.
All right, so this way.
You can talk now, Bennett.
Can I? Okay. Sorry, thanks. I didn't hear all the questions totally clearly, and some of them might not be for me. So maybe I'll just pick the ones I like. I'll be very naughty. Sorry about that. But you have a very nice discussion already about cannabis. I mean, one thing I think I remember, there was a question about cannabis and violence. I don't know if I totally understood that right, but I think that one wasn't totally answered yet. So maybe I'll pick that one. Because, does cannabis and violence sort of correlate, or is there some sort of connections? It's a very interesting thing, and that exists in the drugs literature more generally. Do drug markets necessarily need to be violent? And what most people have sort of that study that more systematically have found is that the violence in drug markets often occurs at the very low levels of drug markets, retail markets. So if you're in a place like maybe Mushin, or if you're in a rough Lagos neighborhood or whatever, it's more likely that violence will happen there. Whereas violence further away from retail markets is not very widespread, actually. So these markets, even without the state intervening to sort out, conflicts between actors, doesn't actually happen too often. But it does happen in some countries, partly also not only because of drugs, but because of other reasons. Anyway, so violence is more likely in the retail sector. And we found that as well when we did our research, when we got involved in some sort of gang-related networks and stuff like that, then violence was more likely than when we talked to farmers who really didn't get involved in violence. But one thing to mention about violence is that probably the most violent actor in the whole drug market is none of the insiders, it's the law enforcement. When you speak to farmers, they will tell you the most violent people they face is when the NDLEA or when the police comes to their communities and scares them like hell. They destroy most of their property. They don't need to be involved in cannabis dealing, but we have spoken to some single mothers who were scared to really to death because of the activities of state actors. So what we usually try to make clear is that the most violent actor in this whole game is the state. They are very brutal, they're very repressive, they destroy people's lives and livelihoods. sometimes not even because they're involved in cannabis. And that's one thing to keep in mind. And if you have an illegal market, if you have illegal cannabis, it's much more likely that the state actors like the NDLEA and the police have those powers to be violent, because they are they have the discretion to crack down. So that's the thing about violence. I think very good points about the cultural dimension of cannabis. In our work, we haven't really looked at that too much, but I mean, for maybe some people here at the LSA, there could be studies done about cannabis and I don't know, and music, for example. You have got music about cannabis or inspired by cannabis that, especially in the Lagos context, you could link it to Fela Kuti. We also worked in the Shrine a little. Yes.
We lost your connection.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's some really good comparative lessons to be learned from liberalization of policy in places like Zimbabwe or South Africa. And it's not all positive for the people, for small-scale farmers, for example, or small-scale people involved in cannabis business. So when they liberalized in Zimbabwe, for example, very few small-scale farmers benefited from that. It was people that were very powerful, military, in the sort of military, in government, who benefited for it. And that exactly is what the Nigerian farmers told us. They were very, very worried that if you liberalize cannabis, there's a danger that they will have to pay tax, which they currently don't. And there's a danger that some very powerful actors might benefit. So our recommendation is basically, if you really think about decriminalizing or legalizing whatever cannabis in Nigeria, think about to whose benefit it should be. Is it just some powerful politicians or economic actors that already make a lot of money, or is it for the ones that are struggling at the moment? So that's something very important to think about, because a lot of other cases, like in Zimbabwe, also in Ghana to some degree, excluded those small actors, and that's the danger. That's a risk, basically. I think if there was anything else, I might have not heard it, and I'm very sorry that I didn't understand your question because of the connection. But yeah, thanks a lot for all your questions.
I have a comment for Taiwo Akiyemi. You mentioned that you are going
Sorry,
to...
me?
No, for Taiwo, not you, Dennis. You mentioned that you are going to administer questionnaire for Gen Z population. And is it going to be a large sample? Because you said you are going to use non-probability sampling, purposive and judgmental sampling also, to get your population for the questionnaire administration. And if you are doing questionnaire administration, you shouldn't use non-probability sampling to get your study population. You should use probability sampling techniques to get them. So I really want to know the clarity. How many people are you interested? Do you propose to recruit into your survey or into your quantitative part of the work?
Please, can you come again? There's a breakage. Can you come again?
You mentioned that you're going to administer questionnaire to Gen Z. And I really want to know the proposed study population, the proposed sample size of your study population for the Gen Z. And how do you intend to get sample size? Because you mentioned that you are going to use judgmental or purposive sampling to get your participants, and that will not work for quantitative study.
Yes, thank you for that observation. For the study, the intention is to make use of key questionnaires, to capture the pool of the Gen Z population that we have around. And by this, the work proposed to capture 300 Gen Z questionnaires.
You cannot use the proposal to. The proposals will not work. Will not work.
Well, so if you can suggest, well, I will suggest that you use global approach because you cannot determine who is thinking, what's it called?
Are they users or non-users? That's another question.
And that's the essence of the global approach. That's what I want to explain. Because global approach, you get one that is using it, the tendency that he will direct you to one or two of his friends that are also using so that so it's getting larger as time goes on.
Let me ask you that. Is it talking to both users and non-users of cannabis for the Gen Z population? Because his objectives are not really asking questions on the use. I think he just wants to know their perception about.
Yes, just like what you suggested, that the snowball approach would be the best. But at the same time, it is not the view of the users alone that will be captured. The view of non-users will also be captured.
That means you can just use probability sampling, systematic sampling, multi-stage sampling, and all of that. So depending on the people, like your study location, but you cannot use judgmental or purposive sampling to get that 300 sample size.
All right, thank you.
So, if you have no question, comments, I have declared this session closed. Thank you very much for coming, for your questions, for your comments. And we really want to ask if we are proposing a special issue to publish on cannabis and for this panel. So if you have any paper that you feel you want to submit, can get across to us through my mail, then you can get we plan to do it towards the third quarter of the year. So if you are interested in publishing of the year, third quarter of the year. Yes, now. So we're expecting your mails or your comments. Thank you very much for joining.